We're joined by the Shadow Financial Secretary to the Treasury, James Murray. James, thank you for joining us. We'll punish tax dodgers, you've said. Should you perhaps start with Angela Rayner?
Well, look, Angela Rayner has answered all the questions that have been put to her. I'm confident she's done nothing wrong. But what this is about is saying that as working people across the country are paying more and more taxes, with frankly the tax burden set to be its highest in 70 years, it is wrong that a minority are failing to pay their fair share. And that's why we set out our plans to close the loopholes which the government is leaving open for non-DOMs as part of a wider plan to invest in HMRC to close the tax gap. And that money, as you rightly said, will go towards our promises on the NHS and breakfast clubs.
James, we don't know whether Angela Rayner has paid her fair share, and actually the former chief prosecutor of this country, Keir Starmer, who's the leader of the Labour Party and probably the next Prime Minister, hasn't even read the legal advice that she's given that you say completely clears her. Why is he so incurious?
Well, look, Angela has answered questions about this matter over recent weeks. I'm confident
she's done nothing wrong. When was the last time she was at a Labour event and took questions from journalists? Because I don't think that's been the case for a number of days.
Well, frankly, I'm confident she's done nothing wrong. And if you look at why this matter is being focused on, I think by the Conservatives in particular, it's no doubt to distract attention from their record in office.
So you shouldn't be subject to scrutiny, James? You shouldn't be subject to scrutiny. You're going to be the next government, probably.
We're talking about the fact that the Conservatives are leaving open loopholes, which mean that people who are non-DOMs will avoid paying hundreds of millions, billions of pounds of tax over the next Parliament because of loopholes the government are leaving in place. These are part of our really important plans to close the tax gap and to make sure that we get more revenue for public services. And that money can be spent on the NHS and breakfast clubs.
We understand that, James, but I think the point we're trying to make here is if Angela has done nothing wrong and she has received that tax advice, why not just release it in order to make this story go away?
Well, look, as Angela said, if other people publish theirs, then she'll publish hers. But she's had advice from HMRC.
Why not set an example?
Very clear she's done nothing wrong. And I think, Angela's been very clear. She's handled this matter in terms of putting out her position. She's answered the questions. I'm confident she's done nothing wrong. And frankly, I think all of the focus on this matter is an attempt to distract from the far bigger question here about the loopholes that we need to close to raise billions of pounds of public services.
I would love to ask you about what I think is actually quite a good plan, James Murray, to get £5 billion back, to try to claw some of that money back. I'd love to do a whole interview on that, but there's so many questions still for Angela Rayner.
I'm happy to do a whole interview on that. I'm happy to do a whole interview on that. I've got lots of detail to tell you about our plans that we developed with experts.
But the fact is, James,
by investing in HMRC capacity.
Is this morning media round talking to lots of broadcasters? Is this a frustrating experience for you, who's presumably put a lot of work into this? Yet, if basic questions were answered by Angela Rayner, if that advice was put into the public domain, if she did a few media interviews on it, for example, you could talk about this till you're blue in the face.
Well, as I said, I'm very happy to talk about this till I'm blue in the face because we've got a lot of details out there which we've developed about our plan to invest in HMRC capacity, to make sure we're closing those loopholes the government are leaving for non-DOMs. And we set out clearly how that was going to raise money that we're going to spend on the NHS and breakfast clubs. And I think that's what matters to people across the country.
And James, I will ask you a question now about these proposals that have been released this morning. You say that it will raise £5 billion a year, but experts suggest that the NHS needs a cash injection of around £8.5 billion a year. That's not including the breakfast clubs that you've also mentioned. Will this really barely touch the sides?
So we set out very precisely to explain how we are going to raise the money to meet the commitments we've made already about the NHS. And that commitment around the NHS, around dentists, around breakfast clubs, the total cost for that package of investment comes to £2 billion. So that's where we set out how we would raise the money to cover that. Now, actually closing the tax gap, our investment in HMRC would raise more than we need for the NHS and breakfast clubs, around twice as much as we would need over the course of the next Parliament. So we have enough money in the plans that we set out to more than cover our commitments, because we've always said that going into the election, any commitments we make will be fully costed and fully funded, and we're keeping to that promise.
You're talking about measures by which you would get that $6 billion, certainly with $5 billion with measures that you put forward. But the fact is, when you are probably when you are actually Financial Secretary to the Treasury after the next election, James Murray, you're going to have to raise taxes, aren't you?
No, look, the tax burden in this country is already set to be its highest in 70 years. We want taxes on working people to be lower. We want to make sure
everyone does,
that
but
we're
you just
growing
might
the
not have
economy,
any opportunity not to, James Murray.
Well, no, we've set out very clearly that we will close specific tax loopholes to fund the pledges that we've made, and that's what we're doing today. So we're setting out our plan in detail about the non-dom loopholes, about the tax compliance work that we set out in our document today. We're setting out exactly how we would raise the money to fund our pledges, and that means that we can get the economy growing. When we have a growing economy, we can fund public services, make people better off. And in the long run, we want taxes to be lower on working people because taxes have gone up and up under this government. And frankly, when taxes are going up so much, when taxes are on course to be the highest in 70 years, it is wrong that a minority of people, the non-DOMs and the others who we would target with our compliance work, are not paying their fair share. And that's why we're setting out this plan today to get that money to invest in public services.
James, it's clear that you care about transparency over tax affairs. Will you be calling for further transparency for all MPs to expose the ways in which they pay their tax?
I'm not going to get into a broader question about, MPs' tax affairs. In a lot of tax affairs are personal matters. I think that people will address questions when they come up. This is about how we raise money for public services, and we're talking about hundreds of millions, billions of pounds worth of tax which is going to be avoided by non-DOMs and by other people who are not complying with HMRC, and that's why we're setting out this investment plan today.
I just want to ask you about this figure about council tax, the number of people who are getting over £150,000 a year. Do you think £150,000 a year is too much for a council boss, James?
I'm sorry, could you just explain the question? Sorry, I couldn't quite hear.
So we have this, there's a story today about council bosses, various councils around the country. There are hundreds of them who are earning more than £150,000 a year, earning more than the Prime Minister. I just wonder if you think £150,000 is too much, too little, or about right to run a council?
Well, I think that running some of the big councils can be a very big, important job, and each council needs to make sure that it has the right person in place. I want to make sure, obviously, that people are paying their taxes. That's what I'm coming on here to talk about today. But I think running councils across the country is an important job. Councils overall have been struggling a lot to deliver services in very challenging circumstances. So I know it's a big job for people to take on.
Well, thank you for joining us this morning. James Murray, Shadow Financial Secretary to the Treasury.
Very much.
Cheers. Well, Anna and Matthew are still with us. What did you make of James Murray's comments there, Anna?
I mean, fine. He's a decent media performer, is what we'd call it. But this could have all got shades of the thick of it here. I mean, why, when you've got everything with Angela Rayner, as Peter rightly pointed out, she has not answered questions. The whole point is it's still very unclear what happened. And then to have a big announcement about chasing tax dodgers. Now, of course, I would not say that anything has been shown definitively to say that she is one, but equally, she's not been upfront in answering the questions to say, well, what happened?
The point I made to James Murray there, Keir Starmer hasn't looked at this legal advice. He says his team have looked at it, but
yeah,
he hasn't.
Of course he hasn't. They're keeping him separate. It's so obvious what's going on.
Well, tell us why. Tell us what is going on.
I mean,
Are they trying to cut her adrift, do you think?
No, I just think that it's probably smart on his part because it means that if something does emerge, then he's got
deniability.
Yeah, of course, right?
I thought it was interesting, that interview, because you, Peter, but also you, Nicola, went in pretty hard on James Murray, and rightly so, because this is, we think, likely, according to the polls, going to be the next government.
They've got to be subject to scrutiny.
We are used to left-leaning commentators such as me giving this government a tough time, and we need to make sure that a future Labour government is properly scrutinised.
Do you think that there is a difference in, as James Murray was suggesting there, do you think there's credence to what he was saying in the way that Angela Rayner's behaviour has been questioned and other Tories'
No, because just a year ago, Nadeem Zahawi lost his career over very correct scrutiny of his tax affairs.
But I think that would the argument be, and I'm just putting across the other argument, that the amount of money is different.
Still wrong.
Yes.
If it happened.
No, I think the sad thing about
the
sad thing about this, just to answer your question,
and the way it's been handled,
is that this is a serious policy. Whether it's going to work or not is another question, and it does, as I said, earlier showed that Labour is really scrambling around for the pennies and the pounds. So they're now attacking tax dodgers. All of us want tax dodgers to pay what they should pay, but it just shows that there isn't much money around, or they certainly don't want to raise taxes, it seems. We're talking, though, about £5 billion. Angela Rayner, who says that she's done nothing wrong, the money, the sum we're talking about potentially is £1,500, which is tiny, tiny, tiny. But, and I think you're right, Peter, if she did do something wrong, whether it's £1,500 or £1 million, it still matters.
And if you have a piece of paper in your possession which says you've done nothing wrong, why not publish it? Okay, you can redact it. I'm not interested in, you know, details about her family or her kids' names or anything like that. You can put different things up, but why not just put it in the public domain? Solve the problem. We've been talking about this for 6 weeks now. And then everybody can move on and talk about the fact that £5 billion needs to be clawed back.
The difficulty is that until and unless she does publish that, unless I'm missing something, I can't see, can you, Anna, how this story is going to go away?
Go away, Anna, is it?
Well, I think, you know, it certainly has made... I mean, you pointed out about her lack of media appearances. Obviously, she made some high-profile ones recently, but someone did some...
Facebook ads, haven't they,
but also,
involving Angela
She
Rayner?
appeared on Newsnight. She did appear
She
on
did
BBC.
recently, but if you look at the last 6 months, she's made very few appearances, despite being an incredibly senior...
Yes.
Well, you know, technically the second most
Deputy
senior
Prime
person
Minister, next Deputy Prime
the
Minister,
party.
probably.
So I think it sort of hampers her own career and being able to highlight what she wants to talk about, which is levelling up and housing and all those very important issues, so, and workers' rights and everything. And I feel like it's already... If she comes on, she's obviously going to get all these questions. If she's not...
But then get over it and let's talk about the main issues.